Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. It is Monday, May 30th, 2022. And after two incredibly hard to swallow mass shootings where 10 African Americans, including 9 senior citizens, were shot to death by a racist in Buffalo, and 19 predominantly Latino fourth grade students were mercilessly gunned down at Robb Elementary in Texas, it's becoming clear that we are living in two Americas, with the nation in as deep a divide as it has been since civil rights and Jim Crow. It is also an America where unarmed people of color are shot and killed almost routinely by police officers, and white perpetrators of mass shootings are like Dylan Roof, driven by police to Burger King, brought in unscratched and claiming mental illness. Or the shooter in Texas, though killed by police, we are learning the disturbing details that trained law enforcement officers stood in a hallway while 10 and 11-year-olds called 911 begging for their help. And the officers did absolutely nothing but stand by and listen to 19 small and brave children die. This is America 2022. And young people of color are placing all the blame, right or wrong, squarely at the feet of the Biden administration. Why is that? And who really is to blame for all of this American carnage? We discussed all that this morning with James Wright of the Washington Informer. And we are also expected to be joined by Mark Thompson. Make it plain, Mark Thompson. And also coming in is Dr. Chavis, our CEO of the National Newspaper. There's Mark. Good morning, Mark, James, and Dr. Chavis.
Good morning.
Good morning,
everyone.
Good morning.
Good to see you all. Listen, we begin with the nation's bitter divide over guns. The tale of two Americas was on vivid display in downtown Houston as protesters waved signs and shouted at NRA members as they walked into the George Brown Convention Center for their meeting and exposition in celebration of its 150th anniversary. The NRA went big for its Texas meeting with a sign outside the convention center promising 14 acres of guns and gear. Is that as tone deaf as you can get, Mark?
First of all, thank you for having me, Stacy. It absolutely is tone deaf, and it speaks to a level of carnage in this country for which those who support the NRA, those in the GOP, have absolutely no regard. And I think it also exposes a political ideology and a political party that, on the one hand, would attack long-standing court ruling and law, Roe v. Wade, under the guise of wanting to protect unborn infants, and yet at the same time have no regard for babies being killed in school. You can't say that you want to stop abortion, but you don't want to stop people actually showing up to shoot babies in school. It is sickening, and it really says it says something wrong with America. One thing Biden is right about when he talks about the soul of America. I just thought that was just something for him to say. But after all of this, you have to say, what is going on with the soul of America when you have other countries in the world? Britain, there is no greater imperialist, colonial, hegemonic power than Britain. They conquered the whole world for thousands of years. Yet they don't even have gun violence like this. America ain't even 300 years old. How has America allowed itself to become the capital of gun violence in the whole wide world? We really are living under what I call a gunocracy.
Well, isn't it that, Mark, too? You asked that question. When we look at what the NRA has put in the pockets of these Republican Congress folks, Republican senators, $13 million for one senator. I mean, it goes on and on. We don't have to, break it down like that, but we know that they have filled the coffers of these
Right.
Republican senators, particularly. Isn't that the answer? Because when they're searching for responses to reporters' questions like, why won't you support some sort of gun control measure? And they give that whole, heartfelt condolences, hearts and prayers,
Thoughts
my
and
heart
prayers,
goes
right.
out. That's not any come on, thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't that the answer right there, that they've been bought and paid for, and they have no soul?
Yes, but the damage is so now deep. I mean, it's also known the NRA does not have the same power and influence it once had. That is a fact. But they've done their job. And so they don't even have to spend as much money anymore because a culture has been cultivated in this country with the help of Donald Trump's candidacy and all that he's brought with him, that people just support this. Some of these people will support this for free now because we got to have guns. We've got to have guns. We've got to have guns. And to me,
Yeah.
that really speaks to how far gone America is ideologically and mentally, that there's such a numbness to gun violence. Let me say this real quick too, Stacey, because I know I want to hear from James and Dr. Chavis too, and it's good to see them both. Good to see all the folks this morning. Um, they always talk about black on black violence for years, and there was never more coverage of that in terms of our community that began in the Reagan administration. That defined black people, unfortunately. I don't like that term. I know none of us do because it's a racist term. It's as if there's no such thing as any other community committing violence against its own. But it's obvious too that that perception of violence, and particularly gun violence, being confined to the black community, it kind of set white folks up and led them to believe that that's just the face of violence. So that now, as we see it happen in every other community, the numbness that black on black violence and that terminology cause, even amongst some of us, has now transferred over to other communities. There is a numbness in America. As we speak, there is the great likelihood of another gun violence shooting a day, another mass shooting. It happens almost every day in America. We're numb. It's like, and that's when you know the soul is truly gone.
Yeah. We have viewers are glad to see the Reverend Mark Thompson. Mark, they're shouting you out on Facebook and on YouTube this morning.
Bless you. Bless you.
James, you know, uh, Reverend Thompson mentioned Donald Trump. Well, the former president and other GOP leaders were at the convention. They rejected efforts to overhaul gun laws, and they mocked Democrats and activists calling for change at the National Rifle Association's annual convention. And again, Trump just last week reposted and seemingly celebrated a post about potential civil war between between blacks and whites. Again, we're talking about the soul, James, and this carnage that continues. Where is this all headed?
Once upon a time, my father belonged to the NRA, and this was in the 1970s. And the NRA was a fairly good organization. It talked about, Second Amendment. It talked about educating about firearms. It talked about gun safety and things like that. But it was only until the 1980s when Ronald Reagan was president, as Mark alluded to, and then Charleston Heston, who, by the way, was at the 1963 March on Washington supporting Martin Luther King, became president. And then all of a sudden, it just took this sharp rightward turn in terms of this extremism. And this is extremism in terms of gun possession and gun ownership, and produces what we have today, which is a total disaster. I don't know what that clown show was about in Houston in terms of the governor who seems to be confused about things. It's easier in Texas to register, or just to buy a gun as opposed to register to vote, but they don't seem to be affected by that. And, it's a shame what happened in Uvalde, but I bet you, as you talked about earlier, the scenario with the police, I bet you if that was in North San Antonio, in those wealthy suburbs in North San Antonio, they would have been in that classroom a whole lot quicker. So you talk about a numbness in America. I think there is a numbness. People just don't care anymore, except when it's their particular ethnic group. Then they really, really care.
Yeah, Paris Brown of the Baltimore Times writes in that they think it's a black problem until it affects the white population. Anything that affects us affects America. Mark, as we wait Dr. Chavis to reemerge there is Dr. Chavis. James mentioned the governor, Abbott. He did not appear in person, but he did send a video to the NRA convention. And this is what he says, quote, "Remember this, there are thousands of laws on the books across the country that limit the owning or using a firearm, laws that have not stopped madmen from carrying out evil acts on innocent people in peaceful communities." Trump, in his speech, called for a series of measures that largely mirrored what other Republicans have proposed throughout the day. Schools with a single entry way, with armed guards stationed there, and exit only fire escapes, and also arming of teachers. Personally, that sounds preposterous to arm teachers. Give them more responsibility, Mark, to be security guards.
Thank you.
Well, not only that, there's some speculation. I was reading yesterday, and I can't even take credit for this, but it's very interesting. You know, Republicans also have been waging for decades an assault on public schools themselves. And the question then becomes, is all of this also another, to use the door metaphor, people talk about single door entry. Is this not a backdoor to continue to undermine public schools and say that public schools can't be made safe? And that is why we have to pretty much end the public school system as we know it. So it's a perfect storm for them to bring about this type of mischief.
Yeah, Dr. Chavis,
Yes.
good to have you. I know you're getting ready to leave, but here's something else that's really stood out. I want you to comment on this. Trump told the NRA, and this is really underscores everything in my view. He told the NRA, "You are the backbone of our movement."
Well, I think they are the backbone. They're the finances of the movement. And I believe that those of us in the black press, those of us in the African American community and other communities of color, we know what they're doing, but we have to also organize. So I really think that 2022, we should not give up any precinct, any congressional district, any governorship, any member of Congress, any member of the Senate. Uh, there's a war going on, and we have to fight with our votes. Having more guns is not the solution. The United States already has more guns than any nation in the world, and we have more violence than any nation in the world. So anyone that's proposing more guns anyway will not work.
Yeah. And then you hear the hollow words of Ted Cruz, the senator out of Texas, who blamed the shooting on quote unquote cultural sickness, including, he says, fatherless children and video games. Again,
Ted
James,
Cruz needs to look in the mirror.
Mark,
Ted
you
Cruz,
want to weigh in on that?
yeah. Ted Cruz is part of the problem.
Go ahead, Doc.
Well, let's be honest. Every opportunity there is to say something for Ted Cruz is something stupid that comes out of his mouth. So if it weren't guns, it'd be something else. Ted Cruz is not an intelligent person. The record shows that. Remember, when he first came to Congress, even people like Mitch McConnell decried his lack of intellect. So Ted's just a clown, always has been, always will be. But you spoke to, Trump alluding to some type of civil war. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone, this is Memorial Day, a day that we founded as African Americans in Charleston, South Carolina. This is a holiday that is celebrated that African Americans founded to honor those who gave their lives for emancipation during the Civil War. But people should Google Professor Carl T. Bogus, Bogus. He is the foremost scholar on the racist history of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment exists because of enslavement. It is really all about the need for the colonists, during and after the American Revolution. Their concern was the right to keep and bear arms to prevent slave insurrections. They don't teach us about that history as much as they're going to be teaching it less because of the war against CRT. But in the 1700s, there were even more enslaved people uprising than has been documented. And there was a fear on the plantations of us constantly uprising. And so they wanted to keep and bear arms to prevent from those arms being used. The argument when they were discussing the Bill of Rights was, look, we can't expend all of our arms fighting British or any other outside forces, and at the same time fight off these African Americans who were trying to kill us for keeping them enslaved. That is the real root. So it is an obsolete amendment. It was never meant to apply to today's reality. And last, let me say this very quickly. This is very important. James alluded to this. It really was in the 1960s that there began to be this shift in what the Second Amendment meant, and it began to rise in prominent, and they got a lot of pseudo scholarship. The NRA hired scholars at universities to start writing articles saying the Second Amendment meant an individual right to keep and bear arms. From the time law review journals were first published back in the 1860s until the 1960s, for 100 years, and law review journals are pretty much what defines legal scholarship, even in the courts. From the 1860s to the 1960s, there was never a single law review journal, Harvard, Yale, any other school in the world, that argued the Second Amendment was originally meant for an individual right to keep and bear arms. So the NRA was never about it. And they said, wait a minute, we got something here. Let's get some scholars to make this up. And then it brings us to the infamous decision in the court in which Scalia wrote the deciding opinion for the first time in history that there should be an individual right to keep and bear arms. But even Scalia said that the word regulation is in that amendment. Even he said that is a reality, but it's not being abided by today. Again, it's more than the law. That we have a gun culture in this country, and we've got to do something about that.
Well, to go along with what Mark Thompson just really broke down for us, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem attacked advocates of gun safety legislation. Here's what she said. She said, "Let me tell you the truth about the enemies of the Second Amendment. They are schooled in the ways of Marx and Lenin." And so it really, when you put that into context, the way Mark when you put it in context what Mark Thompson just broke down, you see exactly what he's saying is 100% on point, James.
Yeah, two things. First of all, what does Karl Marx and Lenin have to do with the Second Amendment in the United States? Correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't they European political philosophers? I mean, they were just philosophers and political people and theorists and stuff. What is that? Well, that's the first thing. Second of all, Stacey, you alluded to something in terms of the Civil War, about Trump talking about a civil war. Trump does not want a civil war in this country because it will not come out good for his side. And he thinks that it is, but it would not. The numbers are not in his favor. I'm not even sure the white people would be on his side in terms of a civil war. So he needs to be quiet about that.
Well, a viral video on Instagram with more than 1.3 million views and more than 5,100 comments. And I think this is very important, Mark, as we bring this up, and James and Dr. Chavis, where a young African-American woman sings about the ever-growing uneasiness the Black community has with the increased targeting of those in the community. Some said the woman in the video said the quiet part out loud when she sings that Black people only voted for Biden because of Obama. The video is captioned in bold lettering with the words, "Inaya killed this and said everything we're feeling." The obvious question and potential major problem for President Biden and Democrats is, if this is everything Black people are feeling, particularly young Black people, what now? As the president arrived in Uvalde yesterday, you could hear discernible chants of do something. fair or unfair, Mark and James and Dr. Chavis, young Black folks are starting to lay all of this at the feet of the administration. Mark, I'll let you speak to that first.
Well, I mean, that's what happens when you're the president. You have to take the weight. The buck stops there. I think that the problem with the Biden administration, and I say this with all due respect, and Democrats in general, there is a level of intellectual dishonesty. In order to project, I guess, positivity and try to claim victory where there is none. Um, what was it Amilcar Cabral said, Ben? Tell no lies, claim no easy victories. Democrats need to be honest. Um, Black people and everybody else voted for Democrats to be in power, but the power doesn't really exist. And there's nothing worse than just not being honest with people. Even though Biden's a president, even though Democrats hold the House and hold the Senate, because of a broken political system, it is not real. Um, and it's not going to be real anytime soon unless something is done. So it might be smart for Biden to be very honest. I think we all owe voters and in the entire community some truth, because when people were asked to vote in 2020 to vote Trump out to give Democrats power, people don't understand, well, where's the power? Why is nothing happening? Because America's democracy is gone. There is no real governance. There is nothing but dysfunction. Nothing. Biden can't do anything because the system is broken. And politicians, including Democrats, are loath to admit that. And for those of us who eat, sleep, and drink this every day, we get it. We know what a filibuster is, but the average American doesn't understand what a filibuster is. That's not been talked about. We've not been educated about that. So they just look at Biden and say, "You the president, what you doing?" But he needs to be very honest and admit that as much as we romanticize this so-called democratic experiment that's been around for hundreds of years, it is a failed experience and it needs to be overhauled.
Well, before James and Dr. Chavis weigh in, let's take a look at that young African-American lady's video.
And stop telling us you'll fix it. We don't want to hear it. And then get on the podium and switch it. The time you had was plenty. Your promises are empty. There's blood on your hands from these babies. Man, really, what you waiting for? Our grannies at the grocery store, but sitting in their cars because they scared to walk through the door. Checking their surroundings before they make another move. Cause it might be a killer with a gun on our too. It's really life or death if they decide to go out. Just trying to go and grab a few things for the house. It's 2022, they still killing over hues while we waiting on you. Man, what y'all want us to do? I'ma just tell you the truth. Obama the only reason that we voted for you. All them promises you made us, you ain't seeing them through. Yeah, you begging my community to trust in you. With melanin a target, that's ridiculous. Police ain't protecting shit, they just killing us. How many ways we gotta beg for it to stop? Now we burying our teachers cause they braver than the cops.
Dr. Chavis, that, Mark, of course, broke it down that although Biden is the president, he still has to look to the Senate, look to Congress. But young people, this is this train of thought, and I'm sure it's just not young people. So there are people who just don't understand. And there's a very, very important midterm election coming up. How dangerous is this for folks to feel this way at this point?
Well, we've been here before. That's why we have to always study history. In 1980, when Reagan was first elected, we all found something very similar. So I think that we have to work on that.
Ben's on a flight.
Doc is apparently getting ready to take off. Yeah.
Now
He's
say what I was
getting
about
ready to take off. But James, I'm gonna
say what I was about to ask you to do is we need to do a whole nother segment. What I was about to suggest is we need to do a whole another segment about how in the world Dr. Chavis is able to stay on a flight and stay on with us as long as he was, because they be ready to throw me off the plane. But I was gonna say, because when he first came on, I heard the pilot make the announcement, we getting ready to take off, and Ben's still on there talking. I'm like, wait a minute, can we do that? I need to know how to do that.
Look, That is Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr. So, look, we don't mean to bring levity to this situation. Mark, you just did. James, I'm going to throw that to you. Not the Dr. Chavis on the plane bit, but
Yeah, I understand.
James. In all seriousness, though, yeah, in all seriousness, though, when you have folks and 1.3 million people viewed that video, 5,000 some odd comments, many likes on that video, meaning that perhaps meaning that people agree with that assessment. That is really, isn't that a problem for the Biden administration right now and for Democrats coming November?
Well, speaking from, and I like to say this, from the Democratic establishment, let me just say that the young lady's video was very touching and very good, quite good. You know, Mark Thompson is a graduate of the DC public schools. And when he was matriculating through the system, he had to have a year of civics in the US government in order to graduate. The District of Columbia and 9 states are the only jurisdictions in this country that require a year of civics. They call it something else with civics. 31 states only have a half a year, and 10 states have no civics requirement at all. So a lot of our young people don't understand the functions of government and how government works. And yes, I'm speaking from the establishment point, but if we were to get more involved into the system by registering to vote, going to meetings, that sort of thing, we might have a different result. So I think her video was very touching, but again, it reflects not understanding how the system works.
Yeah. So listen, King Teasdale says, what a real reflection is this video clip of a courageous young African woman. David Youngblood says it falls on us to educate that young woman and place the blame where it belongs. And that's not Biden's or Democrats' fault. And, black people, many black people, we keep, go ahead.
Let me say this real quick. As I've been watching the video, and I don't. Well, let me put it this way. We do sometimes need to question a lot of these things we see on social media. While I do think that there are a lot of people who may not understand the way the system works and may not have, as James said, may not be educated to it. Whenever we see someone make a video that exclusively blames Biden and not some of these other forces out here, you kind of have to wonder what that's really all about. And we have been targeted for propaganda and disinformation as a Black community more than any other community. And more, we see viral videos, viral social media accounts and posts from folks who appear to be a part of our community that we later learn is really about something else. Biden, I mean, I think it's very hard not to be sophisticated enough to know, Biden has not been, he's been prevented from doing a lot of things that should be done. But that video tied what happened in Buffalo, and God bless Tamika Mallory and Untold Freedom. They had me tag along with them to Buffalo last week for a farmers market to help that community. But some of the language in that video seemed to make Biden a little bit disproportionately responsible for what happened in Buffalo. What happened in Buffalo was a result of white supremacy. I don't see Joe Biden as a proponent of white supremacy at all. But to kind of skip over that and say that, all of it kind of falls, you just have to kind of wonder. And I don't know this young lady, I may be wrong, and maybe I look at too much stuff, but you get it when you start getting some of the language, and then you've got this Candace Owens phenomenon out here. So there's some Black folk that get on social media, and then they're promoted sometimes to cause more confusion amongst us. So yeah, I I think we need to examine that whole situation a bit more closely.
Yeah, and either way, Mark, and what you're saying is it should really be examined, like you said. But David Youngblood makes the point that if this is what that young lady really believes, he says we have failed that young lady, and she has failed to learn civics. And really, what it simply goes this way, right? George Floyd Justice and Police Act, the Voting Rights Act, John Lewis Voting Rights Act, all of that is something, and you're right, the president has been a strong proponent of, but it has to go through Congress, it has to go through the House of Representatives, and then to the Senate. That's where everything has fallen apart, and the president really does not have any control over the outcome of the Senate, especially when the Senate is pretty much, I mean, we say it's evenly split, 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, but we all know that there are two Democrats, two senators posing as Democrats, one out of West Virginia, and then the other one, Arizona, right? So the Democrats do not have a legitimate edge in the Senate to get Biden's agenda passed anyway. So we really have to make that clear, as you're saying, Mark Thompson. That should be clear, as David Youngblood is saying. It should be clear that it doesn't work quite the way the young lady in the video is really saying. But having said all that, though, if she takes that, if many others do take that mindset to the polls, then James, it's game over for Democrats.
Well, in your scenario, it would be, but this is where the Democrats, particularly the African American Democrats, have to step up and speak out and get out of the coffee shops and get into the community. And they have to do this. This is not an option. They have to get out and talk to these folks.
Yeah, education, right? And this, many of us, Mark, we might feel is basic, right? But to some, this young lady that we're talking about, if that's how if that's what she really believes, and no reason not to, we don't know otherwise, put it that way, then there is a lot of education that still needs to be done, right?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of education that needs to be done. And, there also needs to be, we're not even 4 years removed from Donald Trump. No one can reasonably expect that by being apathetic or staying home and not voting in the same numbers we vote. So you say, okay, well, we voted for you, so why should we vote for you again? Well, the alternative is still worse. It is still worse. And, the NRA convention is proof of that when you have the likes of the leadership of that party, including Donald Trump, get up and make the types of statements they made. We can't go back to that either. And frankly, as a young woman, it would seem to me that the education would also be evident in, as I alluded to earlier, the recent news regarding Roe. That decision that is forthcoming is a very clear statement that of who is in power. The rights of women are about to have control and say over their own bodies. This is a handmaid's tale come to life. Biden's not doing that. That's the same party, the same group of people that is helping to turn an eye against preventing gun violence. That's not Biden. And so that point has to be understood and be made. And I'd like to think that, and it's not just a responsibility for Black voters, white women put Donald Trump in office. And then the next day, 24 hours later, after inauguration, joined Tamika Mallory on the mall and said, we made a mistake. We should have done that. Okay. Well, here is the result of you doing that.
Right.
And now your right to choose to have control over your own body is about to be taken away. And they've already predicted, for as far as our LGBTQIA allies are, and I'm an ally of that community, that's next. Same-sex marriage equality is gone. So I just want to be clear. We
Well,
also can't
interracial marriage too, right? Because
yeah, that was the thing. But I want to be clear too, because we just can't beat, this is the NMPA, but we can't just beat up our community.
Right.
Part of, unfortunately, the culture in this country, it ain't just us. We do not vote in this country once again, unlike other countries and how they
yes,
deal with gun violence. Overall in this country, whether we be black, white, women, LGBTQIA, Latino, we don't vote at the level of participation that other countries do either. There's something about that culture. After what I just said, why do we need to convince every woman, include white women, to get out and vote to save themselves? Why do we have to convince people? Why do we have to convince white LGBTQIs, hey y'all, your man, three black men saying, your marriage quality is about to go down the drain. Why do
Yep.
we have to emphasize? What is it about this culture that, one, there's apathy when it comes to voter participation, and there's apathy and numbness when it comes to being killed in the streets? There is something wrong with this country, and it's as if we're all in some intoxicated haze, drunk on Netflix and TikTok. Really, that's just what we do. Everybody TikToking. We TikToking ourselves. We TikTok folks getting shot up
hmm
in the street. But everybody, young, old, is looking at TikTok. Stacy, there is something wrong with the culture in this country, and we're gonna look up one day, and if y'all don't, it's a cliche to say, it could have been me. Someone today watching this is very likely to lose someone to gun violence. Someone watching this today within a year is very likely to be a woman who will not have the reproductive rights that she has to say after this decision.
Right.
Someone watching this within a year may be married to a loved one of the same sex, and that will be gone. So, um, the show is let it be known. But once it's known, when are we going to stand up and act and do something about it?
Mm, mm.
Well, Mark Thompson, you said something, and I know we are over time, and we rarely go over time. But when we have a Reverend Mark Thompson with us, we have to
I'm
go a little
sorry.
over. But you said something earlier in the broadcast. No, listen. That's a complete compliment. But you said something earlier about other countries. The other day, I had a chance to speak with the ambassador to the U.S. from Botswana, who talked about. I asked him about how they view the shootings over here, and he said that for those in Africa, for those in different parts of the world, to see this happen in America, it's really eye opening. America has always been seen as this, the leader of this, the leader of that, the leader of the free world, if you
Mhm.
will. How damaged, James and Mark, is this country's reputation? And we know it didn't just start. The damaging of America's reputation didn't just start. But how bad is it? I listened to the ambassador from Botswana. What he said to me, and just looking from afar, how bad is it, James and Mark?
Very bad. And
And start with you,
I'll be
James. Go
very,
ahead.
very specific. It started with Donald Trump when he didn't want to participate in a lot of the treaties that needed to be renewed, particularly on climate change. It started when he emphasized human rights around the world. It seems like he took a blind eye to China's human rights policy, all on the base of the dollar. So it really started with Donald Trump. And what's happening is that the Biden administration is now having to clean up after that. But as Mark alluded to, that's going to take a little time. So this is when America really started to go down, because if you really look at things, when President Obama was in power, America really had a great deal of credibility.
And not only that,
Mark?
um, it looks very bad. And I'm gonna tell you something that makes it look worse. I wish I had the link to so you all could throw it up there, but Sky News out of Britain cornered Ted
Yep.
Cruz the other day, and they were asking him about it. Now, you mentioned, how America's held up in the world. One thing that I think everybody in the whole wide world agrees to is that Ted Cruz is stupid and no good. When Ted Cruz says in the interview, because he's asked about how it's viewed in the world, he said it doesn't matter. America is a place where everybody wants to migrate to and be here. It's the greatest country in the world. When Ted Cruz said that in that interview, Ted Cruz saying that probably discouraged people for the first time in wanting to come to America, because it was a very common sense question. Because you have to look at that. People do want to, I want to get to America. Well, wait a minute now. They shooting and killing everybody in America. One. Two, here Ted Cruz is saying, in spite of that, everybody still wants to come in. So I think people who might have been on their way to the airport and heard Ted Cruz say that probably say, wait a minute, if he's saying that, maybe this really
Turn
ain't the
around.
best place to come. Let's turn the car back around. And I think that's very, very real. Why on earth would anyone want to what is the American dream when most of us are living in a nightmare, worried whether our children are going to be killed in a school? Someone whom we all three of us admire was Dr. John Henry Clark. And what did he say? He said, a nation will be judged on how it cares for its very young and its very old. And in less than a week, some of our elders, our seniors, were taken down in the top supermarket in Buffalo. And within a few days later, very young babies taken down. And let me tell you how bad it is, how it's eating itself up, how America's just falling apart. You got people in that school, God bless them, who outside that school trying to get in there to save their children. They didn't care about any gun. They didn't run for cover. They were trying to get in there. We're now learning that. See, this affects everybody. Even Abbott is on the ropes now. You got his police forces preventing people from going in to save their own children. Finding out that some of those police only went in there to save their children. All right. You had a woman, several people who they handcuffed to keep from trying to get in there. One woman got out the handcuffs, ran in there and got her child and got on out of there. This is bedlam
You do anything for
in
your
this
child.
country.
Yep.
That's right. This is utter bedlam when you have that kind of thing going on. And now it's just going to be open season, because when it happens again, other parents are going to be motivated. They're not going to trust the police or law enforcement to do anything about it, like they didn't do anything in Uvalde. You had a retired law enforcement agent who was on Reddit with the Tops shooter, okay, who knew about it in advance. He posted what he was going to go in there and do to people. And then you've got, let's face it, this America is too proud. People like to put stuff on black folk. Black folk don't like to go get mental health. No one likes to address mental health issues in this country. Nobody needs all of this is needed. Watch this, y'all, and this will prove me right. The not the most recent one, but the earlier New York City subway shooter up here in New York, who turned himself in. But that was a big story. Remember when that stopped being a story? It was off the front page. Remember when they picked him up? He made a direct statement into the camera. He said, Mayor Eric Adams, I am a product of the New York mental health system. When he said that, every New Yorker, black, white, brown, whatever, believed him. They said, oh, it made it like in an instant, it added up. And you never heard anything else
Makes sense.
about that story. But as horrified and as a crazy black man, but when he said that, people were like, okay, yeah, we believe that. So we don't address any of that's why I'm saying this. There's an illness, COVID. And let me tell you something, y'all. I think everybody would have to agree to die from COVID in America this hour is merciful. You got a choice between dying of COVID and being shot up somewhere where you live, where your children go to school. What's worse, you being killed
That's
or
a
watching
heavy statement. Go ahead, Mark.
but what's worse, so think about this, you being shot up or you're watching your children being shot up while you standing outside of a school knowing your grandmother went to the grocery store where she always goes and being shot up, and you got a video of this joker coming in seeing a white man on the floor. So, excuse me, I didn't mean to almost shoot you. There is and for us to just be, for us all just to go on as if we're living normal lives
There you
and
go.
function as if
Yeah.
something is wrong in this country, and Botswana, every other country in the world, has a right to look at us and say, what on earth is going on over there? But we about to, as soon as it's over, we're gonna finish with we on looking at Facebook now, then we're gonna go to TikTok. We're gonna look at the TikTok and do some dances.
It's what's what's interesting, Mark. Brian Stelter of CNN was doing a report over the weekend, and he talked about the many mass shootings that don't go reported. It doesn't make the news. It goes into the local newspapers and local news. But he made a comment that I thought was interesting. He said CNN defines mass shootings when there are 4 or more victims, not including the shooter. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Mass means multiple. Yes or no?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah. So they said 4 or more. If there are 2 or more people, that's a mass shooting, right or wrong?
Well, now,
So the point,
right.
but the point, Mark, is this. Although they give us numbers, it's been far too many mass shootings. I think the count is over 260 so far this year alone, but it tells you it's a whole lot more we don't even know about. A whole lot more that don't get counted as mass shootings as well.
Right, that's right. And I'll tell you something worse than that. We doesn't have to be. There's so much gun violence in America. There's mass shootings and individual shootings. There's also, and I believe I have this right. It's on Twitter. There's a Twitter account that keeps a running tally of gun incidents every day. I think it's called Gun Fail. Somebody listening might want to look that up for me and put it in
Yeah.
chat. But check this out. We're not even talking about the accidental gun deaths that happen by the thousands in this country every day. People are dying of guns every single kids finding the parents' guns in the home. What do we have guns for? Oh, again, let's get back to the racism. Because there's this pornographic fantasy in America about home invasion. That's what it's really all about. People in America, they've lived in this fantasy. And again, this is part of the sickness and the ideology that somebody's going to run up in your house and try to take you or your family. Many fantasize is going to be a black man, birth of a nation. But yet, they're not news stories every day about anything like that happening anywhere. 1, 2, when it does happen, there aren't news stories about people having guns in the home and being in a position to defend themselves when it happens. It is a fantasy. Unfortunately, if somebody runs up in your house for a home invasion and you and your family are asleep, because you're asleep and in your home, you're at somewhat of a disadvantage. The assailant has the advantage. But people have this fantasy, I gotta have a gun, gotta have a gun. And the majority of those guns in the home end up with a dead family member. Because again, when you have mental health issues, when you have economic problems that nobody wants to admit, Reverend Barber about to have the Poor People's Campaign June 18th. Another mental health issue in America is most folk in America, most of us are in denial about our economic situation. Most of us don't even want to win. We too proud to admit I'm either poor or low wealth. I'm doing good. No, you're not. And you have a gun in the house. I'm ready for this home invasion. But no money, no prosperity, disagreement. What happens with that gun? Race don't matter. Race doesn't matter. So again, other countries are looking at us. Let's look at the numbers of what happens in other countries. Does America have a higher rate of gun violence, people using firearms against one another domestically in the home? Yes. So you look at all of that. This is, again, a culture of guns. And I know we're over time. That's why y'all shouldn't ask me to come on here. It's a big mistake. Francis Wellsing, because I'm about to say something else. We might have to go a little bit further. We got to be smart. As the 3 of us know this. That's why I talked about John Henry Clark. See, I'm talking to folks, ladies and gentlemen. I'm talking to 2 other brothers. We've been doing this a long time. They've come up with me. We've all come up together. So we can't deny our learning and our teaching. We talk about listening to our elders. It would be blasphemous for any of the 3 of us here To deny what Dr. John Henry Clark taught us, or to deny, even this goes to those of you watching and listening too, do not be blasphemous enough to sit back and deny what Dr. Frances Cress Welsing taught us.
Yes.
Come on now. What did she teach us? We this is here. That can
Mhm.
never go away. She talked about what guns symbolize
Yeah. Yeah.
and why there's an obsession.
Mhm.
See, and you know, so let's be clear about who we are and what we know about our knowledge. And she told us what the gun is symbolic of, and it is a phallic symbol.
That's right.
And that is why it is black. And that this is their
Yeah.
obsession, and it never goes away. So folks, let's not be in denial about what this is really all about. I know I've said too much. Y'all should kick me out the Zoom or whatever.
Not at all.
So,
Earlier in the earlier we had a viewer, Mark, who said, well, we need to educate people on this platform. And I think for the last 51 minutes, you have done just that. We certainly appreciate you. We hope that we can steal you away again. We know your schedule is so tight, but we're so grateful to have you, Mark. James, as always, we're glad to have you. Remember, the NNPA's convention is coming up next month, June 22nd. It is the 195th year of the Black Press of America. 195 years, Mark. You know, founded before the end of slavery back in 1827, Freedom's Journal in New York. But there will be a special conversation, a lot of special conversations during this 195th anniversary convention in New Orleans on June 22nd. You can register. You can come out and join us at www.nnpa/events.com. You can register for the hotel, get a nice rate. You can also sign up or register for some of these sessions. One of the sessions will be a conversation about small businesses and equity with Erica Miles, who's the former director of equity inclusion at the U.S. House of Representatives and senior consultant at Wells Fargo. So that's just one of many, just to whet your appetite on that. And obviously, so much more that we're going to be discussing during this very, very special convention. www.nnpa-events.com. And as you see the picture there, the great Stephanie Mills will highlight the convention, will be one of the highlights of the convention as she performs live exclusively for the Black Press of America. Thanks so much for joining Let It Be Known. Thank you again, Mark Thompson. Let it make it plain. And James Wright of the Washington Informer. Thanks to Dr. Chavis for joining us from an aircraft that Mark is so amazed about. So we will see you tomorrow.